Would you please stand and join me in the pledge? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just want to remind everybody, this is non-action board meeting tonight. There's no action to be taken. We're gonna move right down to the new business non-action items real quick and go with Katie Calvert, Fremont County Youth Service Funding Request and discussion for 23-24. Come on right up here and might pull that mic down to you.
Good
Okay,
evening.
introduce yourselves.
My name is Hattie Calvert, and I am the Assistant Director for Fremont County Youth Services, Juvenile Justice Services of Fremont County.
And I'm Casey Murray, the Executive Director for Juvenile Justice Services of Fremont County.
Okay, give us your best shot.
Thank you. So we're here this evening to request a funding amount of $30,000. For that $30,000, we're requesting helps us fund our programs, ankle monitors, shoplifting classes we have a day reporting center that we run. We handle all the citations that are issued in Fremont County, all juvenile citations. We process all of those, do intakes on those juveniles, and then we submit those intakes and recommendations to the county attorney's office on what to do with those said juveniles and citations and that they receive. This last year, the city of Lander issued 121 citations to juveniles specifically. That's a pretty major increase from the last couple of years. In 2020, from 2021, there was only 59 of those citations that were issued. So pretty big jump in citations that we're seeing, and the largest amount of those being drug and alcohol citations. Of those 121 citations that were issued, 22 of those were alcohol citations and 45 of them are drug offenses. So that's a pretty huge increase from 10 each, drug and alcohol, 10 alcohol, 10 drug in the previous year. So we're seeing it a lot in our communities. We're seeing a lot in our kids. And with that comes a lot more intense supervision. We have to get pretty creative in those because we're not jailing juveniles. That's not really our favorite thing to do, is put kids in jail. So with that comes possible admittance into the juvenile treatment court, which is higher intense level supervision, ankle monitors for house arrest purposes and those kinds of things. So do you guys have any questions?
What did we give you this last year? 10 minutes.
In 2022, 2023, the amount was 28,750.
Go ahead, Councilman Larson. Do you want to turn your mic on? Excuse me, thank you.
All right, thanks for bringing that information up. Who else is donating to this Fremont County?
So we get funds from the city of Riverton as well as the county. That is who our employer is Fremont County. And then we have a variety of grants that we use, and we have under those, we have, like I said, we have our day reporting center, and that has a direct services provider, that provides like transportation and all services for our students at day reporting. And we have 2 probation officers in our Riverton office and a probation officer in Orlando.
So you've got 3 full-time employees then?
4,
4, okay.
including our executive.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how many employees you funded on $30,000?
Not a lot.
Not a lot, okay. Any idea, being that you're working with these youth, what has brought about the rise that you've seen from last year?
I would say accessibility would probably be one of the factors in that. As well as a lot of this is probably going to be an continuing trend with the COVID ripple effects from that. Kids were out of school, socially, there's just a variety of things. Families are really struggling, and when our families struggle, our kids really struggle.
Thank you.
You're still asking for we put in a budget for 28.7, didn't we, Shari?
We actually have a total of 45,000 on that line item, and 15 goes to the chamber. So you do have 30,000. I didn't want to make the decision of how much to give them. That's why we asked that they come and present to you all and you decide how much you wanted to give to them.
I just wanted to make sure you wanted the 28 plus 30 on top of it, be great. But that's what happened, so.
Mayor, I have a couple questions.
Councilman Cox?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you guys for coming out. Obviously, it's nice to see you both here and presenting. I do want to give a little bit of historical knowledge just for the council that may not know is in roughly 2002, Youth Services received funding from JBIG, which was the Juvenile Accountability Incentive Block Grant. And that funding filtered through the federal pipeline into different rural communities to help with the services that they provided. And that funding was approximately $90,000 a year. And then there was funding for Lander, and then there was also funding for Riverton from that same block grant. And then over the course of time, that funding went away, and Youth Services really struggled. And the idea was always that they provide juvenile probation services for our law enforcement, where kids are cited and they have some accountability, and they're able to report, do some community service, whatever their conditions are. And so for years, that funding went away. And it was always the idea that a full-time probation officer for the city, for instance, would cost well in excess of, $80,000 a year with a full benefit package, et cetera. And so it is quite the discount. And I know over the course of the years, I think Shari can attest to this. There's been one year it's like 12,000, the next year it's 15,000, one year it's, but as funding gets tight around juvenile justice specifically, you're going to see an increase probably in some requests, and it's still worth every penny because this problem is not going away. We're discussing it at the school level of how we can deal with it differently there. But these guys do, obviously, I think they do a great job with the resources that they have. And I would say, Casey, if I may ask Casey a question, what is your overall operating budget approximately for juvenile justice?
The request for this last year was about 350,000.
So about 10% of what their overall request. So thank you, guys.
Councilman Hunt?
Yes, thank you. I had a question. The 121 citations, are there repeat offenders? Is that 121 kids? Is it less than that?
That's 121 citations. So yes, we do have repeat offenders. But the citations.
So there are repeats. So in that 121, that
Yeah, it
figure
could,
should be.
yeah, they could, reoffend, at any given point, or, there is instances where they might get a drug charge as well, or alcohol is more likely with an alcohol charge and interference and those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Larson.
Our caseloads run, I would say between 40 and 50, depending on, and of that, I would say, it used to be about a 10% is your really high risk, really high need. I would say that in the last 3 years, we've seen that jump to closer to 20% of our caseloads are that high risk, high need individual with, severe mental health or drugs, a series of drug charges that need, pretty intense supervision that would require, at a minimum weekly visits and, in our juvenile treatment court kids, we like to UA them, 2 to 3 times a week if we can get them. And those UAs are pretty costly. We do a 16 panel UA to catch, everything that we can in those UAs.
Out of that 122 that you've got citations for, how many actual individuals committed those 122 violations?
I do not have that number in front of me. If I had to
Yes.
guess off the top of my head, I would say 100. 90 to 100 probably. There are some instances, like I said, where, a juvenile could get, 2 to 3 citations in one crime or one setting, but most of when I was looking over the Lander stuff, a lot of it is single citation, single incident, and then maybe a couple repeat offenders, but a lot of them were new. Not new to us necessarily, but new to the calendar year or the fiscal year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor? Yeah.
Yes.
You
Go
do.
ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for coming. It's clearly such an essential service for our community, and I fully in support of the $30,000 allocation. I'm curious on a couple of points on the bar chart you provided to us. I'm struggling to understand the different color coding systems. Is this all of City of Lander data?
Yes, this
And
is this is simply just Lander data,
So
yes.
what's the difference between blue, green, and purple?
So those are, I don't have a color copy, so I
Oh.
apologize.
Or just
They
different-
would be the ethnicity of the individual.
Okay, thank you. And of the increase this year, or this past year and the years previously, you mentioned the ongoing sort of social tensions and the accessibility of the substances. But that's still a pretty huge spike. So do you think the citations reflect greater usage, or the citations reflect greater enforcement and awareness of those users? Are we catching more people, or were people actually using or causing citations, I guess, because it's not all drugs?
I would say that, like I said, I think that the population of the high risk, high need has jumped so significantly. And within that, you're going to see a lot more high risk, high need behavior, drugs being, probably towards the top of that behavior. We do get a lot of citations from schools, kids using at school. I would say that that's our biggest jump. Obviously we get a lot from the street as well, but to be quite honest, the kids don't really seem to care what they're doing within the bounds of the school. And that includes using or coming back to school under the influence. And, I think there's been a good amount of training and those kinds of things within the school district to catch those individuals. And that's, I would say, probably, I would attribute to the biggest increase in that.
Okay, that's helpful. And Mayor, if I may ask a follow-up,
You may.
a follow-up. I would like to underline, I'm sure you're clearly tracking closely the new school board policy regarding drug and
Correct.
alcohol testing or drug testing.
Yes.
Can you speak to, you think the impact of that policy on the number of citations you're going to see, on the decrease of usage? Anything you'd like to talk about in terms of impact of that policy on your program?
So I'll speak to that one. Honestly, I think what we're gonna see is what we already know. So for us on our side, we already know that what we're seeing is minimal compared to what's actually happening. So I think what you're gonna end up seeing is there's gonna be a lot more kids being cited, depending on how that policy rolls out and depending on the randomness of the testing. I think you're gonna catch some kids you didn't think were using, but the ones that you think are using, there's no reason to test them. You already, I think, have a pretty good idea, like within the schools. And so I anticipate that that's gonna be a pretty significant increase, but also just speaking to the service side, the services that are provided for juveniles to get that kind of treatment for substance abuse is pretty limited in this community. So there is gonna be that impact as well. Just as part of the work, just as kind of an idea of kind of how struggling the system is. The juvenile treatment court, which I'm also over, does not have, I can't find a therapist for that position. I know the school district also has a position open. And so trying to attract the professionals that can actually do that work has been incredibly challenging. And so that drug testing policy is also going to put a strain on the system. And so it's going to be a balance, I think, of figuring out how we best serve the high risk, high need kids, but also try to do a lot more prevention stuff within the schools and within the community to try to help limit those.
I can't help myself, I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was such a helpful answer. So do you anticipate then that you would be looking at a budget increase for next year, that we're seeing more, and that's nothing loaded or, you know, negative about that, but if we're seeing, if we're catching more students using and we have more citations, I mean, more students enrolled, you said the services will be strained. And so we need to, I'm hearing build out perhaps the services we provide. So do you think we'll be looking at a larger budget allocation next year, or the county or this Riverton? Well, I guess not Riverton, because it's gonna be Lander students with that policy.
I believe that every year that we ask for money, we're going to continue to ask for more because I don't believe that we're going to see a decrease. I think what we're seeing is really, we've gotten to a point now where we're kind of at the tipping point where we're really seeing what's been going on, but now we're catching it. We all kind of knew what was going on, I think, within the community, but now we have the evidence, I guess, to really say, hey, no, this is actually a bigger problem than what we thought.
Thank you.
Well, Mayor, thank you. I think that it would be very, I need to put a stop to the rumor that there will be citations issued for positive UAs. There will be no citations issued for athletes who are, it's, you know, there's some due process there. And so they can't just charge everybody. That's a kind of a common occurrence within school districts where you can drug test your athletes because it's a privilege to participate in extracurricular activities, whereas if it was a kid that was like in trouble or they were bringing drugs or using drugs at school, that's different. But with a random drug testing policy, there will be no citations issued if in the event that those UAs are positive. That would only be for students that were actively under the influence at school or in possession at school. Little different. I wouldn't see an increase. There would be no citations as a result of that.
Okay, so am I hearing, Mayor, if I may, so I'm hearing that, thank you for that clarification, that's really helpful. That we might not see a strain on the services because of that policy then, if there are increased citations?
It doesn't, if the athletes are being drug tested and there's no citation issued, we would not see that individual, coming from that. The school, like Melinda said, is mostly if they are coming in possession of drugs to LVHS or Lander Middle, or coming back from, I mean, we have kids using the building, to be quite honest with everybody. They have, they sneak down to the bathroom or, whatever. And I think that there's been a increase in that, as well as, does Lander Valley have vape detectors in their bathrooms?
They do.
That would be a reason as well. So those vape detectors, they let everybody on the administration know that there's been a detection of a vape device in the bathrooms. And then they, I mean, it's a big strain on resources for the administration as well, because then they're watching cameras, who's in, who's out, where, the drug use within our schools and within our communities is putting a strain on everybody.
Thank you.
Well, just one last
Go ahead, Councilman Thomas.
thought too. We've talked, the chief and I've had, or the chief has expressed, I've expressed, there's been other expression of concern for juvenile crime within our community. And, our chief is pretty proactive, which has been really nice to try to resolve some of those issues. I think if you follow social media at all, you would see that there's been several attempted break-ins in cars. There's been a big notice, please keep your cars locked. I've worked in juvenile justice since 1999. I kept telling people you need to lock your cars. It's the craziest thing. People in Wyoming don't lock your cars and they get stolen every other day. But it really happens. And then within those thefts, you're talking about firearms being stolen out of vehicles, lots of money, prescription medication. And we have on that end, the front end is good. Our law enforcement does a really good job, specifically in Lander. We have to talk too about what are we going to do accountability wise through the court system. And I think it has to be a discussion for, kind of a roundtable discussion at some point, because there is a significant problem. And when you went up 65% citations in a year, we might want to.
We need to bring we need to bring the prosecuting attorneys in and the judges in.
Right.
We tried to have that meeting and we still need to continue to work towards that goal.
I would agree.
Because they're the key points to all of this.
And there are, just to be clear, these are only misdemeanor citations. So youth services did not handle any felony level stuff. That does not come through our office. That's all a direct file into the district court. So, the crime, the more severe felony crime is not within these, and that does happen as well. As you guys know, there's a significant rise in that as well.
Good. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Okay, we'll move right on. We got a couple presentations from HDR. One's on the 23 Water Master Plan and the other's on Fremont County Hillcrest Strategic Plan. I don't want to. Getting feedback? It is. It's supposed to pick me up. That's why we gotta show this supposed to pick us up. Can you hear me now? Okay, we'll start over. We have HDR here for presentation of the 2023 Water Master Plan, and on item C is Fremont County Hillcrest Strategic Plan. Kyle, you're up. You want to pull that mic towards you?
Sure. So we've got Yuri Shelby on the phone. He's going to present the Water Master Plan. And so hopefully we can get him unmuted and he'll walk us through that.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Yeah. I got a thumbs up from Missy, but I can't really see anyone else, so hopefully you can hear me. All right, my name's Yuri Shelby. I was the project manager on this 2022 Water Master Plan for the city of Lander, and we just wanted to run through and present some of the highlights of the study for y'all before you decide whether to adopt it. Oh, next slide, please. All right, quick agenda here. We'll go through the background and purpose of the study, a summary of the recommendations, who funded the study, how the future projects are planned to be funded, and then the rate study portion of the recommendations. Next slide. All right, so the last, these master plans can occur every 10 to 20 years if you're on top of it. Generally, the planning period is about 20 years. The last one was done in 2011. And kind of some of the main items that were identified were a lot of system hydraulics, so not getting good fire flows in areas of the city where it was needed. not having good water quality, things of that nature. So a lot of the projects that came out of that study have now been completed in only 10 years, which is pretty admirable. And a lot of those, we did some hydraulic modeling, it's called. You plug in, the water system and then look at, hey, if there was a fire in this location, could the system handle it? Is there good water quality? So we did a lot of that modeling, and it indicated that the city is in a good situation hydraulically. But there are more issues, which we looked at in this study. So next slide. So we identified, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of core focus areas for the study. And we started looking at this in summer of 2020, by the way. So it's been a long time, kind of getting an understanding of the unique issues that Lander faces, and trying to put together a good plan that addresses all those issues. So number one, obviously, is that as everyone learned last winter, there's a lot of issues with the existing system. Pipes are old, they're not buried deep enough, the material's bad or not appropriate for the soils that it's buried in. And so kind of the top priority is just fixing some of those known issues that are within the system. So we identified quite a few projects that range anywhere from just standard pipelines, like this figure shows the Fifth Street water line job that's actually already, I think, designed, to projects at the water treatment plant. The intake structure off the river has issues. The larger steel tank up by the treatment plant has issues. So just lots of different items with the existing system that are in need of work. And so those were put into the plan. Another important factor is water supply. So making sure that there's enough water for users in Lander, and as the city expands, one thing that's kind of, I don't know if it's unique about Lander, but the Lander water system supplies a lot of rural users in Fremont County. So we had to look at kind of those demands and, does the city have sufficient water rights and water supply to meet demands, even under a pretty conservative, small growth rate? So we looked at a 50-year planning horizon for that, just because that those things take more time. Fiscal responsibility, we just wanted to make sure that the amount of projects we wanted to do were there was a avenue to pay for them that was realistic. And that's where some of the rate recommendations and project funding breakdown come from. System expansion. So we looked at, if and when the city grows, like where are the best areas to put pipelines? What sizes do those pipelines need to be? What existing pressure zones they're called, or service areas, where can those expand to? All those things of that nature, that where, if those, if a developer comes in and wants to develop a subdivision up North Second, then there's a plan there for, okay, you need to put in a 12-inch water line tying here, and just give some guidance for that, instead of it being kind of just there not being a plan in place for that. And then finally, regionalization. So that's becoming increasingly popular with the Wyoming Water Development Commission. They pay for a lot of these projects with grants. And, it's in their best interest to create larger decentralized systems. Well, not decentralized, but basically looking at can the city tie to Hudson? Can they tie to potentially the, Shoshone utility? What that looks like, just because in the long run, it's more financially or can be more um, financially feasible to do that instead of, Hudson has like a multi-million-dollar treatment plant for a town of 400, and it's extremely difficult to find qualified operators to run that and extremely expensive. So we looked at, what are the possible regional connections that could be made, as well as looking at wholesale customers that are currently or could be tied to the city of Lander. Those include like the industrial park, Wyoming Life Resource Center, Red Fox HOA. So some of those are already tied to the city, but city needs to look at, their rate structure for wholesale customers. And anyways, next slide. Okay, so we came up with the help of city staff. We came up with 48 total projects to be completed over the next 20 years. And then I've got some numbers here for costs. Keep in mind, I'll break down where these costs are being paid from, but there's roughly 157 million in inflated costs. So when you're planning, you look at when you're going to do a project and how much the dollar value is going to increase. So as of right now, it's about 100 million in costs for this plan, but by the time you build everything, it's closer to 160 million. Out of that, the city pays for $53 million. Again, that's inflated costs. So, and then also 31 million is planned to be paid for using loans, which I understand are eligible for loan forgiveness, but we did not plan for that. We just planned that would be a conventional loan. So next slide. So this is just kind of the overview of all the project. Yes.
You okay if questions are asked as?
Oh yeah,
long?
absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
You have a question, Councilman Larson?
I do, as these 48 projects that you've got listed out here, they're not listed, but you've got 48 projects scoped out there. How are you going about prioritizing them?
That's a great question. So kind of a mixture of what the city's priorities were, and then also the need. Like, go to the next slide, if you would, please. So like, number one priority is looking at all the pipelines. We saw a bunch of failures over the winter. So getting a better handle of, which pipelines, in addition to the ones that have been identified, the city should prioritize replacing. The Worthen Meadows outlet gate, if that thing goes, that could be extremely problematic. So it's kind of a blend. Things that were, would have a high consequence, kind of bumped up to the top. And then also just based on talking to the city was kind of how we prioritize these projects. The finances also played into that as well. Go ahead. Does that answer your question, Councilman?
Yes, I just got a follow up here though.
Yep.
So this is probably a Lance question then. Do you have those projects prioritized now?
Yeah, if we adopt this master plan, you're adopting the priority within the plan. And obviously it could change a little bit, depending on what happens, but there's a lot of cause and effect in the priorities as well. You know, some of this is dealing with growth and expansion. You know, Yuri will get into that a little bit more as we're looking at projects further down the list, but it's also a model predicting the future, which you've got to live in real time and figure out what's going on around you and how you're going to react to that. The infrastructure that's failing, yeah, we know exactly where it's failing. We have that in you know, maps and programs to say that this line has broke 4 times in this block and it needs to go, or this sewer doesn't have a bottom and it needs to be replaced. So those are the easy ones. It's really those other ones that you're getting down to it on how we're going to afford to do some of those projects. You know, if you're really getting into Worthen Reservoir and an expansion at some point in time, you know, there's got to be partners, there's got to be other funds that come to that. So this isn't a be all end all list, but it's a good idea where to follow along on what we need to do. The major maintenance plan, yeah, those are all things that we'll address and we'll work on in the next 10 years. And then on the project list, we'll start knocking off the things that we can afford. As we've looked into the SRF projects, that's taking a big portion of the first 10 or 9 off the list that are on this.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Hahn.
Yes, Lance, I have one question. In this 48 total projects, are there any updates on the water plant itself? Or is that not needed at this time?
No, we've been renewing the plant over the last 8 years since I've been here. So as you've seen invoices come through, new valves, new pumps, the water plant is getting renewed kind of piece by piece and a little at a time and staying ahead of failure. The SCADA system that's been purchased and upgraded all the way through surveillance, it's constantly a changing piece that's part of these programs and paid for mostly out of budget, not major project. Like if you remember, we've got a valve on order that's close to 200 and some $1,000.
Mhm.
That's a redundant replacement valve for controlling the plant. So it's going to take the old one out of service, and the old one's going to get rebuilt, and then we'll have a backup. So a lot of that is happening just in regular maintenance versus just identified projects. But some of the things on here, like making sure the cathodic protection still working at the steel tank, you know, those are just good reminders. As we look through things, those go onto a plan, those come up at certain times, and we handle those with just regular budget.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Yuri, go ahead.
I think I'd like to add one thing, and I think Missy has a question. Yeah, so we did have someone, one of our treatment plant experts, kind of go through the treatment plant, and like Lance was saying, everything there is pretty. The city's done an excellent job of maintaining the treatment plant, and we really didn't. We have 2 planned projects in the capital improvements plan, but they're honestly fairly minor items that need to be addressed. So I just wanted to add that, you know, the city's done an excellent job with the treatment plant. So
Okay, before we go to the next slide, Yuri, I have a question. Councilman White.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Yuri, for this presentation. My question's similar, maybe a little more pointed than what Councilman Larson asked, and this is likewise probably a little more for you, Lance. So 2 questions, actually. So you did the testing to, gosh, that was several months ago, to identify weak spots in the pipes, which was great that was done, identified many, many areas. So first question is, were the areas that failed over this extreme winter directly correlated to that, mostly correlated to that? How many were unknowns? And then in regards to the second question is in regards to the projects, to what extent did the issues that we faced this winter add to the project list, or were they already some majority known as issues and were already on the project list?
Go ahead, Lance.
So Missy, to answer your question, a lot of the pipes that we saw last winter failed because just of shallow water mains that were not necessarily on that list. Our ductile iron pipe, which we're seeing like on Second Street, buried in rock, isn't a fast wearing pipe for us. Ductile iron pipe in the clay is. And so that's where it gets thinner walled and is failing much faster. So the same pipe that could have been put in Second Street in the Dillon area at the same time, one of them could be more than halfway through its life or 3/4 through its life, while the other one is, 10 or 20% through its life. It's just soil reactivity that's driving some of those projects. Second Street was not one of those areas that we're working on now, but around First Street, as we move First through Third, we know that that's been graded differently and the streets have been cut down and since the water lines were installed and the water lines were not lowered. And then a lot of those water lines are 4-inch. And we do not have the fire flows in those areas we'd like to have that an 8-inch pipe gives us. So they're on the replacement because of size, not necessarily because of having water line breaks or issues there. So when we see something happen like last year, that was strictly caused because of the extreme cold. And then finding out that these pipes that are in the ground are hard to get parts for anymore because they're so old, they're oddball sizes, and then trying to adapt those to something new. So it's easier for us to replace them with a common size plastic pipe and do these projects than it is to wait on parts that may never come. So yes, it does jump in priority when we see things that we can't fix and we have to come up with a plan. But some of them are overlaying in areas that we already have issues.
Okay, so I thank you, Lance. I take from that that some of the problem spots were already known and were on the list, and this past winter added some to the list, a combination of both.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yuri, you're back on.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so just real quick, who paid for the study? The city paid I believe a $1,000 application fee. And then Wyoming Water Development Commission paid for the rest, and it was roughly $200,000. So pretty good deal for the city. Next slide. Okay, and then this kind of a busy slide, but who pays for the projects? I just wanted to kind of show, because those numbers are so large seeming, kind of how that breaks down to users of the water system. So when we were doing the financial planning with the city initially, we wanted to look at just having cash funded projects, and the rate increases to make that happen were astronomical. At that point, we decided to recommend going with a debt to cash blended funding of projects. The advantage of that is you're making all these improvements now, and you don't want that financial burden to fall on users today when this infrastructure is going to be there for, many, many decades, hopefully. Right. So we want the costs of these improvements to fall on all beneficiaries, not just the people paying rates today. So just really quickly, a breakdown, roughly 13.5% of the costs go to users, current users. That's all cash funded portions of projects. 20% go to all users that are debt funded. Over 50% is eligible to be grant funded. And then the remaining, 13 or so percent would be paid for by special improvements districts or user groups that want to connect to the system. Next slide, or any questions on that, I guess. Missy?
Nope.
Thank you. So I both love seeing that 54+% can be eligible to be paid for by the state. And what's our confidence level that those funds will be available for the next 20 years? Looking at the various challenges that the state has with funding, to what extent can we be confident that we can in fact have the majority paid for by state funds? I know you got to pull out your crystal
Yeah.
ball.
I mean, there's always going to be uncertainty about the future. I don't know if the past is an indicator that the state has uh, paid for grants or provided grants for water projects. But yeah, I guess you kind of just uh, kind of plan for what has been the case in the past, and if it changes, then adjust accordingly. I don't know if Lance has anything to add to that, but
Sure. With the inflation that we've seen recently, we're still on our projects from several years ago, and we haven't asked for anything new, and we were told not to ask for anything new because it would not be funded through water development. So right now, there's a shortage of funding within the water development program, and they're trying to catch up on previously funded projects within their system that are under construction or designed. So we're going to have to be mindful of how much money is really there, be methodical as far as what projects we're asking for through their program, and be ahead of that program by several years from when we need a project, so that we're planned accordingly. So yes, it's not infinite. And so to count on water development money, even now, is not something we can do, but it's helpful when our projects do qualify. So we haven't set our rates on the fact that we're going to get the grant, but we're also not ignoring that. I mean, we've probably put $40 million worth of grant money in the infrastructure in the last 5 to 8 years within this community. So we've been very lucky to be eligible for these projects, and we're not going to stop applying. But that could adjust rates as we're going along when we get a grant to pay for large portions, like we did the tank and pump station, when that's a $10 million job that could go 100% towards rates, but it comes up to be completely paid for by state dollars rather than local dollars, and we don't have to adjust the rate. So the council votes on rates yearly or by every 2 years, and you can choose to what rate you're going to adjust, but we have to pay off our debt, make sure we're paying our loans, and then have a plan to do the next set of projects as well.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. And Yuri, I appreciate your explanation about the benefit of having debt funding, being that everyone who's using it today shouldn't be responsible for all repairs and upgrade that could last decades long. No one likes going into debt. I get that. But yet that seems like the more fair and equitable way to share the cost burden of those, rather than all at once. So thank you for noting that. I'm also curious, what is it we're looking at on the slide? What part of the water system is that?
so that's actually the tank and pump station project that Lance mentioned. That's inside the vault, outside of the Ellis tank. That's that big concrete tank we're replacing, kind of if you're driving up Sinks Canyon Highway off on the right. And that is the old, I believe the one that's kind of capped is an old tank outlet pipe. And then Lance is gonna have to help me. And then the one on the that's
It was part of
furthest
the
away is-
infiltration gallery. And so when
Oh,
the
yeah.
city lost that pipe that's capped, that was the water that came directly from the infiltration gallery up by Deer Valley Pheasant Run in that area. And so that's the changes where pipes were connected differently. Inside this vault, we're currently running a pressure valve that cuts 150 pounds to 8 PSI. And we have the tank offline right now at Ellis, just to make sure that we can run this way all next summer. So we're doing a trial run, but it's inside that vault as well, just making sure everything works. But very noisy around that area. But if you guys ever want to see, these are 20-inch and 24-inch valves and things that do all kinds of amazing things as far as water's concerned. So if you guys want to check something like that out, I'd be happy to take you in there and show you what all the parts and pieces do.
I would love to take advantage of that, Lance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yuri, you're up.
All right, next slide. I guess I shouldn't open my mouth on that one, so I apologize for that. All right, so just finally, this is kind of, I've got two graphs here, kind of following up on what Missy was just talking about, where you know, with the debt funding, you're spreading the costs. But the graph on the left basically shows, so the blue bars at the bottom, that's the city's kind of their operating and maintenance budget that they have for the water system. And then their, let's see here, the middle light blue is existing debt, and then new debt to fund projects is in red, and then cash funded is in the orange. Hopefully this isn't too boring. But then it basically it shows the total revenue required for the city to meet their, you know, to meet their obligations under this plan. And that's that, yeah, that black dotted line. You can see it's kind of a mixture of, okay, you got new debt, cash funded projects, and then existing O&M, and then old debt. So from that, then our rate person, who's much smarter than I am, kind of looked at, okay, here's what is required revenue wise, and here's the rates. You know, like obviously this is kind of just a flat rate increase, but that'll help the city to meet that revenue requirement, that black dotted line, with time. And I want to reiterate too that this plan is somewhat dynamic, you know, like if some of those loans are forgiven, the SRF loans, if some of the projects are not needed, if there's additional grant funding available, like Lance brought up the tank and pump station. Originally, that was just a water development commission grant, but an abandoned mine land grant became available. The city applied for it, and now that $10 million project is 100% funded by grants, rather than the original plan was, you know, I think 67% grant, 33% cash. So these things do adjust with time based on shifting priorities, available funds, and all that. This is just kind of this is the plan now that you're adopting, but is certainly not, it's something that is dynamic. So
Yuri,
yes.
also, I was gonna make the point that you guys gave us the spreadsheet that these graphs are built on, and everything is built around. And so the other thing that we have is that we can adjust the model in real time based on adopted rates, project costs, other things that go into that. And then it will adjust accordingly, telling us what the recommended rate increases will be or where we are in the plan, correct?
That's correct. Yep. Thanks for bringing that up. Yep. Next slide. I think that's it. So if anyone has any questions, speak now. And then oh yeah, Missy has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Yuri, I'm thinking back to the presentation when you first brought this out. We had the public meeting. You had a slide that was showing all of the pipe and lander that was, I think it was pre-1974. And I
Yep.
think you used a portion of that slide in one of tonight's slides. But can you, I think this is an interesting part for us as council and for any public or media that are listening in. There is a lot of yellow on that slide. Can you tell us how, are all of those yellow pieces listed on these 48 projects? To what extent are they not? To me, that's one of a key way to educate all of us about why this is such a major undertaking. So any info you can share with that about how many linear feet there are.
Sure. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I know what figure you're talking about, but I think it was roughly 20 miles of pipe that is uh ductile iron and older than, I think, 77. But that being said, like Lance was saying, depending on where that pipe is installed really affects its
The-
condition. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of why the number one, and the city knows, city staff know, they're very savvy on, hey, we have this many breaks in this area, and this is our number one priority pipeline we got to replace. So that being said, the number one deal is just doing a kind of a mapping, a little bit more in-depth mapping overlay of where they're getting the most breaks, and then and soil conditions in those areas, pipe material. We didn't quite go as far down that path. And then that will set those priorities, give more clarity to some of those. The other thing to note is in the plan, I think there is budgeting plan for replacement of distribution mains that are in need of replacement that aren't already being planned for. It's not a lot, but that is something that's in the plan. One of the things that's tricky is distribution mains aren't eligible for grant funding through water development. So we could plan for transmission mains. So those are kind of the bigger sized pipes replacements, like on 5th Street, Lincoln Street, 1st Street. Those are grant eligible, but if it's just a strictly distribution pipeline, we had to plan for it to be cash funded, cash or debt funded. So does that answer your question? Is that helpful?
It does. Yeah, thank you. That's
welcome.
an impressive figure, and I appreciate reiteration of there's a lot of, it depends in terms of determining condition of those aging pipes.
Yep.
Okay, council, any other questions? None?
Mayor, I
You
do.
have one?
Thanks. Yuri, I have a question about the prioritization of projects. So when we were on the slide that you had with the map and the 48 projects,
Yep.
with the caveat, maybe I didn't dive deep enough into the appendices, I struggled to find that in the report. My understanding of the prioritization of the projects is in section 11 in the report. Can you square for me, did I mishear that this list on the slide is not the prioritization list and it is in section 11?
This is the prioritized list.
Where
And
report is this?
what's that?
Where in the report do I find that list?
It should be, okay, so we turned in a draft. I just want to make sure that you haven't, we kind of brushed some of that up between the draft and the final because we realized it was a little not as clear as it could have been. So I just want to make sure you do have the final stamped copy, because the list is in section 1, I believe, and then also in section 11.
Okay,
And then you can also look at that. There's a table kind of showing the schedule. That's from the rate plan.
Okay.
Hold on, let me see here.
So this might be my error. I am using, I think, the draft document that was supplied to us for July 11th.
Yeah, so this one, I would get the newer copy. It's much clearer. That was one of the feedback items we got. Like, it
We'll
made
get that.
sense in my head, but it made sense to no one else. So we changed that. It sounds like it didn't make sense to you either. So I'm glad that we changed that. But yeah, take a look at the final draft. It should be a lot clearer.
That's one thing that was in our comments is a clear list. And so you'll find it in there.
in the
So
final.
we'll drop it to you guys one way or another in your Dropbox if you don't have the
Great. I'm
final
not
copy.
seeing it, but maybe I missed that. Yuri, what other changes would you highlight between the draft and final to keep an eye on? Since I was relying on the draft here apparently.
Let me think here. I mean, the project list and the priority is the same. I think just,
But it was
um,
the appearance.
yeah, it was,
Order. And so the structure and the meat of the document still the same, just the way that it comes across, then some of the summaries. Just what it's saying and how much they did as far as different topics.
Okay, great.
a little
That-
more user friendly and digestible than it was. So,
Awesome. And I wouldn't say that the draft wasn't accessible. I actually found it so interesting and the wealth of information I didn't know. Clearly, not being a water expert. Mayor, I have another follow-up if I may.
Go ahead.
Yuri, can you speak to the non-revenue water on the draft report that's around page 12? The takeaway I had from that section is that there is a discrepancy. There is some significant amount of non-revenue water, and we're attributing most of that to data collection and the various ways we're looking at meter and data. I guess my question is, what are other causes that could be out there? And are we highly confident that it's a data question?
yeah, so I'll take a stab at that and then Lance can follow up because I know he's looked at this
Figure.
pretty in depth. If that's okay, Lance. So great question. A lot of it we think has to do with, well, okay, first off, you expect non-revenue water or water losses due to leakage, et cetera, like meter reading errors of about 10% is pretty good, pretty common. So just to set that expectation up front. But a lot of it came down to instrumentation. So the city had recently installed new flow meters at the treatment plant and in some of the pressure reducing valve stations, and kind of determined that lower flows, they were not that accurate. So that's one problem. You have bad instrumentation. The metering, the residential meters, as you may or may not know, the city's planning to replace their meters. So there's likely, there's some error in usage by users. And then the final thing I'd say would be just matching up. So the city does their billing based on a certain cycle, and then the treatment plant does their metering on a slightly different cycle. So there's a discrepancy between, when you're establishing the difference between what's coming through the plant and what people are using, you're measuring one at slightly different time than the other. So that's another discrepancy. And we didn't do like an in-depth statistical analysis of that, but there didn't seem to be any kind of pattern to those differences. And so that kind of led us, and also given that the city has done a lot of leak detection programs, and so they're pretty confident there's no major leaks or anything. And so that's kind of why we determined that it's likely a data issue, and the city's planning to install new meters, and then, likely sync up some of their, or improve some of their data monitoring. So that's my 2 cents on the matter, but Lance might have some.
Go ahead, Lance.
Sure, thanks, Mayor. So I'll add on to that. You're also playing with 7 million gallons of storage in the equation, whether you
Oh, yeah.
completed any of that storage or filled up some of that storage. And a lot of the construction meters we use around town are metered at a different time as well. So we're looking at that information even on our projects. But if we're taking water out or putting water in or filling or wasting or flushing, all of those things affect your water equation. And so, yes, the plant has a weakness in their discharge meters. We have 2 more ordered up that are low flow and going to be better. A lot of the plant information that you're looking at is based on the intake meter because it cares what water in is. more than it cared about water out. And so when you're not looking at water out specifically as what comes out of the clear well and all these different storage capacities and how water moves from one tank to the other, it's really hard. You need to know exactly how much storage you had, at the start of it, how much storage you have after so many days, and then compare those two calculations. The meters that we're looking at, anything with a pulse, will be calibrated and potentially communicating over cellular. And we think we can even hook up the rural water house, because that's another wild card. That thing's going all the time. And then you've got to pull that data out of a web browser in order to correlate that back to the month. So not everything's on the same system. But when I first arrived, we had some major leaks in the system. We identified those major leaks, and we were running about average at our lowest point, 1.6 million gallons a day. And then we fixed some of the major problems within the system, and the plant got so low they could hardly run it. It went below 1 million gallons a day, which was below the design criteria. And we actually have been operating there on our off-peak times. So that tells us still, like, we're not seeing anything major outside of irrigation when everything slows down and the plant's just running to keep town going. We know what that low average is roughly, and that doesn't change much. So if we run between 1 million and 1.2, everything's good. Shane can instantly see when something happens with town. Like, he can call us almost before we call them and be like, okay, something's going on 3rd Street. And he's like, yeah, my demand just picked up. So we have a pretty tight system. And so that's why the numbers weren't correlating. And we've got to get better infrastructure, better timing to report back our loss, because we're shooting for under, I'd really like to be around 5% leakage if we could be there. And I believe we're between 5 and 10.
And maybe follow up,
Go ahead.
when you say leakage, is that synonymous with non-revenue water then? In what you just said about you want 5%?
Yeah, the water that we just cannot find anymore through the system, that's what we're looking for. And some of that can be through, metering issues or whatever it may be, but a lot of that is just in our ability to account for the water at the exact same moment and then understand how much water's in the system at that time.
That's fascinating. And Mayor, if I may,
Go ahead.
in the simplistic way I'm hearing you, so we are looking, this study says we have about 20%, 10% Yuri, you said is expected. Lance, you wanted to get us to 5%. And we have made major improvements in the past. Do you have clearly plans ahead to better sync up those cycles and get better data and get to that point? So I'm not concerned about the 20% because we have plans to lower it. Is that my takeaway?
Yeah, that's the goal. And if we had a major break within the system, we have no way of knowing how much water came out in any of those given times. So something that happened in a month that spilled and we're trying to get it shut down, we can get an idea of roughly how much water came out based on the size of the hole that we think is there, but it's a rough calculation, not a measured calculation. So anything that happens within your system can end up being an issue for you that you don't understand as well. But that's why we went through and we hired somebody to listen to all our lines and identify, small leaks to big leaks, went through and repaired some of those smaller issues, but we'll keep sounding our pipes, keep doing the things that we need to reduce that number if we see issues.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Right. Anything else? Gary, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for your time, and hopefully it made sense. Our office is on Main Street, so feel free to stop by anytime, or Lance has our contact info, so.
Sure,
Thank you.
I'm gonna throw one more comment out there because it was asked previously. So when we're talking about rural expansion and we're talking about growth, we're talking about not putting that on the existing customers, but more so looking for developers or looking for people who want to be special improvement districts to fund those future projects. So if they're already not a member of our water system, we're not recommending taking them on unless we're annexing them. That's a change because that's the leverage of the service that you're providing them. If they want the water, then they probably should be included in the city boundary and then paying the same rate as everybody else, versus there's no incentive once you give away the water in annexation. So they can do special improvement districts. We can work with other parties, but we're also to some extent saying that their water and water right probably should come from a separate right rather than the city's right. So a junior water right that's for drinking purposes only, not irrigation, that gets put into play when the river's in priority, so that we're not using the existing city water rights to fund rural projects. So when we're looking at that piece, we think we have ways of developing and growing in the water supply to do that. We're also identifying other places where there's decent water supply, such as up Baldwin Creek, and there's some wells up there. You know, those are good projects if we need to add it to the system, but ways that projects could be added if the city were to grow and you need to bring in additional water supply. So for 50 years, we're in pretty good shape between Worthen and the water rights we have now, but some of the projects we're looking at are in irrigation to relieve some of the stress of the potable water supply. And, you know, trying to get on raw water rather than treating it on grass and lowering that from that 5.5 million gallons a day in the summer to, you know, maybe 2.5, and free up that capacity as well. So a lot of the things that we're trying to do through conservation should last a really long time and put the city of Lander in a good place as far as water is concerned.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next project. Kyle, Steve, did you want to come up and sit up front? Talking about Hillcrest too, so
He probably doesn't.
he probably doesn't, but he's here, so I'll just make him take a hot seat on the other side of Kyle.
All right, so I'm Kyle Leto, I'm with HDR. And was the project engineer on this Hillcrest Drive strategic plan. So just kind of starting out the purpose of the project. The idea was to just evaluate the future transportation needs on Hillcrest, and it's basically from the intersection that you can see in the picture there at Bridger Street, clear down to Mortimer Lane. So the need for the project, I think everybody is relatively aware of some of what is going on Hillcrest Drive. It's currently used quite a bit by different modes of traffic, including pedestrians and bikes, on top of just the vehicles. There are no shoulders to speak of on the road, and it's got some geometry deficiencies that make it a little bit challenging, especially when you got a narrow road and you add bikes and pedestrians into that same corridor. So the need is to basically create a safe and walkable corridor that and bikeable that basically improves multimodal access for all users. As part of this, we looked at what a county road is, a typical county road. So if the county just went in to replace this like any other normal county road, you know, using the county road fund manual, what would that look like? And so based on the average daily traffic volume, we identified that 10 to 11 foot wide lanes with 2 foot wide shoulders for a typical 24 to 26 foot county road would be what is normally what the county would put on a road that didn't have pedestrians. To kind of put that in context, the existing road is only 19 feet wide and there's not any shoulders on it at all. So that gives you 9.5 foot lanes thereabouts for the most part. There was a previous study that we had done kind of for the city of Lander that looked at safe routes and walkable, bikeable routes, and Hillcrest Drive was mentioned as part of that. And you know, I think everybody is aware of the tomato loop, and that's why it gets used, is that loop basically starts if you're starting on Hillcrest and runs down to Mortimer Lane, comes back up Sinks Canyon Road, comes down Fremont Street, and then connects there through the park. And so it's a well-used loop, and it's frequented by pedestrians and bicyclists. The perception on the road is that it just feels like it's unsafe to walk and bike there. And then motorists also notice that as they're driving down the road because of some of the geometry deficiencies that I'd mentioned. We had two public meetings. The first public meeting was just to kind of get out the word that we were doing a study and to kind of gather some initial input on Hillcrest itself. We sent out mailers to all the landowners along the route. And both of the meetings were well attended. Second public meeting, we presented several alternatives, which we'll talk about tonight, to the public to kind of get feedback on all those different alternatives. We provided maps and people wrote on maps and gave us comments. So we received emails, and we incorporated a lot of that stuff into the final report. As expected, safety and speed were some of the largest points of discussion. And then the route is used by a lot of the people that live there, and they feel like it's uncomfortable as well as just people that are using it that don't live there. So that was the consensus. Any questions so far? Moving on to some of the alternatives that were presented. This first alternative looks at more or less of, it's called a paved shoulder section. And what it has is two 10-foot wide travel lanes for vehicles, and then a 1.5 foot buffer that typically you'll have a stripe on either side of that buffer. And, you know, you can put rumble strips in that piece to provide some more delineation between it and the biking and walking lanes that are out on the shoulders. The total section width on that, so the paved shoulder width would be 5 foot on both sides, and then that 1.5 foot buffer, as I mentioned. The total section width for this is 33 feet wide, which is, you know, quite a bit wider than like the 24 to 26 foot wide typical county road. And so that, you know, can present some issues. So the city, basically, the section of the road that's within city limits is from Bridger Street down to just past where the park pathway ties in. And then it transitions just a little bit south of there to county maintenance. And so right south of that section, there are some residences that are pretty close to the road. And those that we kind of called that the bottleneck as part of the project, because it's where, you know, we've got a lot of tightness there. And, you know, any kind of widening of the road we saw as being a little bit of an issue or could be challenging to get right away for. So some of the pros of this alternative is it provides more comfortable two-way travel for bikes. So bikes can travel with vehicles. Because the pavement section is just all one piece, it's all maintained as just part of the road, which is good. And then the wide shoulders also provide a wider clear zone, which is basically just that zone outside of the travel lanes that, say, if a vehicle drifts outside of that, they've got more room on the surface to recover. It also provides places for emergency parking if you have vehicles that need to park. And then because the shoulders are part of the road, it gets maintained as part of the roadway. I mentioned that the widened road is going to have some impact on adjacent property owners, especially through that bottleneck location. And then one of the other deficiencies with this is currently on the section that's within city limits, there's a detached path that runs from Bridger and then crosses Hillcrest to get over to the pathway that comes up from the park. And so that crossing is just kind of it's a mid-road crossing, and it's not like at an intersection or something where people normally stop. So the issue with that is you end up having people failing to stop for pedestrians sometimes. And so because this had, you know, that crossing would be maintained depending on which side of the road you're using. It was kind of seen as like a less safe alternative when compared with some of the other alternatives. One of the other issues is it's not consistent with Mortimer Lane. I guess I should also mention that when you get down to Mortimer Lane, if you have, you know, travel on both sides, you have potentially another crossing down there too. And then the only other one that I had was just lack of physical separation could be less comfortable for pedestrians. So a lot of times when people are walking, they like to have that buffer or grass space between them and traffic, as opposed to being on the same level as the road. So any questions on that alternative? So the next alternative is called a side path. And so what we looked at as part of this alternative was, you know, that section that's in the, within the city limits, there is already a side path there. And so what we proposed was what happens if we just extend that side path, you know, all the way through the project from, you know, Bridger down to Mortimer Lane. And so looking at that alternative, you know, some of the pros for it is it provides that comfortable location for pedestrians especially, but there were a lot more cons and with this alternative, and most of them were impacts to adjacent property owners. So you would be impacting every property owner basically past where the city park pathway ties in all the way down to Mortimer Lane, and have to get right away for all of that. There's a lot of trees and bushes and utilities and just different things that are on that side of the road that make it challenging. And so that was kind of the major takeaway with this one. And you still end up having the roadway crossings that we were talking about with the other alternative one. And then lastly, long-term maintenance, because they're two separate pieces, you know, the city and county would have to maintain the road and a separated pathway. And so sometimes what ends up happening with these separated pathways is the maintenance, you know, if you imagine all of the maintenance that we have on roads is hard to keep up with. And then pathways just get a much lower priority on top of that. So any questions on this alternative? So alternative 3 is kind of just it's called an advisory shoulder or an edge lane shoulder or edge lane section. What this alternative is kind of just a temporary, what can we do in the existing road space to better define what people are already doing? And so what this ends up doing is it creates more of a shared space for pedestrians and bikes and vehicles. And, you know, it basically stripes and signs out what people are currently already doing. So say you have like the situation shown here with you know, a vehicle that isn't facing oncoming traffic, they just move over into that center lane and pass pedestrians and bikes. And that's kind of what people are doing now. If you're in the situation where you've got like two vehicles coming head on and there's the off chance that there's also a pedestrian, basically the vehicle just yields or holds up behind the pedestrian or bikes. And then once they have the ability to pass, they go around. And so, as I mentioned, this is kind of an interim solution. And, you know, it's something that the city and county could contemplate doing currently to kind of better define how that space is used. But ultimately, I think from a safety and comfort, you know, user comfortability standpoint, if that's even a word, you'd want to try to move towards another alternative that's, you know, more permanent. So some of the pros for this is it's pretty easy to add striping and signage and then do an education effort just to explain to people like, here's the expectation of how you're supposed to use this road. And, you know, it's also something that if it doesn't work, you don't have to repaint the stripes or you can take the signage down. So there's some options there. Another pro that we identified is just because you're using the existing roadway, it doesn't impact the surrounding properties because it's the same road that's there currently. I already mentioned the kind of the con with the interim solution. The other kind of issue with this is they're kind of a new roadway treatment. And so a lot of people maybe aren't used to like the expectation of what's going on there. And so just getting the education and awareness part out, I think is going to be really, really important. Another con that's not on the list is just, you know, like I said, long-term, this doesn't fix the existing issues with the road. You know, I think the county's been wanting to do something on Hillcrest for some time. And, you know, this buys some time, but I don't think it kind of addresses that long-term maintenance issue. And I think Steve would probably agree, like long-term maintenance wise is to you know, rebuild the road or do something to make some changes that are more permanent and more than just a typical county road section or an overlay on this existing road. So, is there any questions on that one? Sure.
In all your studies and everything, how many people have been struck by a vehicle? How many pedestrians have been hit by a vehicle on that section of road in the county?
You know, we didn't look at crash data as part of the study, and maybe we should
So we
have.
don't know if there's a problem.
Say that again. I'm
So
sorry.
we don't know if there's a problem then?
I mean, the reason why this has come up is just because of how many people use that road and just the feedback the county's been getting for years and years on, and the city for that matter, on, you know, people being able to use that road for more than just vehicle traffic.
Go ahead, Steve.
So the county, by the way, Steve Bauman, County Planning. The county recognized this as a problem a long time ago. It's been one of the top ranked projects for the county 1% funding committee for a really, really long time. And in the early 2000s, the county went to get a YDOT grant for the purpose of doing the entire road, Hillcrest to Mortimer Lane and intersecting to Sinks Canyon. And right about the time that we were getting ready to do that, the 2010 flood hit and took out the bridge on Mortimer Lane, and the county was only able to support the portion of that study from the bridge to Sinks Canyon with the intent that we would continue to do the funding at some later date. Number of folks changed positions at the county. It remained as a high priority at the 1% committee funding level. And we picked it up as a consequence of the requirements of the 1% committee.
Okay, so the key word I've heard over and over again is county. Why does the city have to involve city funding in a county project?
Well, so the city is responsible for maintenance, like I mentioned, within that section of road that's within the city limits. And so, you know, I guess that's why it's a joint venture.
So I guess the quick and dirty answer there is the county is going to proceed with this project. And it's being done for public health and safety reasons. Pure and simple. That was the reason it was put on the 1% funding list in the first place, was it's a safety issue. And the city, we asked if the city would like to participate in this project simply because it's a continuation of a health and safety issue that the county has already observed. So, that's the reason the county is proceeding with it. I'm not here to suggest you have to proceed or do anything with it. That's what the county is going to do.
And Mayor, may I add that,
Councilman Stool?
thank you. So this body agreed I'm looking in summer of 2021, when we signed an MOU with the county for our portion, which was, I mean, correct me at any time, here, Regine, $2,600 maximum towards the study funds. So I think that's when our body agreed, this is something that's priority for us to join in and look at as well. And so now we're seeing the fruits of that study.
So what was the 200,000 for? That got brought up at the meeting the other day with the commissioners. You
I
don't
think
know?
I threw out a number that the engineering study that would be the result of this study for the purpose of taking a look at availability of what infrastructure is in the way in the current road base, and the engineering work that would be done to make sure that we have safe horizontal and vertical curves, and taking a look at necessary additional easements for the purpose of being able to implement this study. I just tossed out a number that I thought the commissioners asked me specifically what I thought the cost for the engineering study would be, and I threw that out. No idea whether that's what it's going to be, but that was my off the cuff number.
Okay.
And that $200,000 wasn't intended to be the city's portion of that. That's what I thought the entire study would be. So in the past, we shared it proportionally. So I guess it would be up to the city council to make a determination.
Right. We don't take public comment during this meeting. We don't take public comment. All right, thank you. Can you provide it by email to us, to the council? That would be great. Okay, thank you. Okay, if you could email it in, that'd be great. Okay, let's move forward, Kyle. And the majority of this project is counties. Just get that straight. You're here just to include the council in on what the county's up to, so, okay.
So we're moving on to alternative 4. Alternative 4 looked at a shared use path. And so kind of the difference between this and that side path option is that the shared use path we envisioned kind of taking off at a completely different alignment than the road. So what it would include is basically still using the side path that is from Bridger Street down to the park pathway. But at that point, it would follow the cemetery ditch, kind of on that'd be the west side of cemetery ditch, and then basically follow that behind some of those properties, and then eventually end up combining back with Mortimer Lane, just this side of where those two bridges are on Mortimer Lane. And so the idea with that being, it creates a whole separate path system, takes all the bikes and pedestrians off the road, and, provides a path that people could use. Obviously, that is gonna have some major impact on those property owners. And so that's one of the major cons with this, is it bisects existing properties, and it creates an additional barrier for livestock grazing and watering. The long-term maintenance of a separated path is, as mentioned previously, can be problematic when it's not attached to the roadway. It'll just, it becomes less of a priority at a certain point. And then on top of that, you'd still have to do your roadway improvements, with more of a typical county road section on Hillcrest Drive. And so, it's basically just two separate projects that end up happening, as opposed to trying to knock everything out with one project. And so, is there any questions on that one?
Mayor?
Councilman Larson?
Yes, I think that, you can see I mean, that dedicated path, a shared youth path, I mean, that really looks cool. When you think about, geez, it'd be nice to have that path down there by the ditch and so on and so forth, but you look at the dedicated path over there from the casino into Riverton, and it was nice. It was utilized there for a short time, and then, like say, you had flood issues, and all of a sudden that becomes second priority as far as maintaining that path, and it was just it becomes very problematic to maintain, and I think you guys are very wise on putting that way down on the list.
Moving on to alternative 5. Alternative 5 is what we call the Mortimer Lane inspired section. So we basically took what was completed down on Mortimer Lane when the county had rebuilt that section, like Steve had mentioned, from the bridge over to Sinks Canyon Road, and basically added that section, so it would have a 10-foot basically shared space for the bikes and peds. There's a 2-foot buffer shown there, and then 2 10-foot drive lanes, and then a 2-foot paved shoulder for a total of a 34-foot section width. Some of the pros for this option, it eliminates that mid-road crossing that I'd mentioned previously, that is there at the park, and then it also eliminates, some of the other crossings, the crossing down there at Mortimer Lane. It uses a similar treatment to what's currently on Mortimer Lane and Sinks Canyon, so there's that consistency. People are used to it. They're used to seeing that shared use section. And then additionally, as we've talked about with some of these others, is it'll be maintained as part of the roadway because it's attached. Some of the cons, again, this widened road is going to impact some of those property owners, and including through the bottleneck location. One of the things that we've been told about this, just from some of the people out there in the community, is it's not ideal for bikes sometimes, because if you're coming back to the north, you're basically driving against traffic, which is less comfortable for people on bikes. And then similar to that section we saw for alternative 1, there's not like that physical separation, and so it could be less comfortable for pedestrians. So any questions on that one? Moving on to some of the public sentiment. So there was also 2 other alternatives that we didn't really talk about here. Before I move on to this, there was a alternative 6, which was kind of a combination of the Mortimer Lane section and that separated path. But basically the separated path just, followed the cemetery ditch section, and then kind of past the bottleneck that we've been talking about, and then tied back into Hillcrest Drive about midway down the road. So it was kind of a combination of the 2. And then alternative 7 envisioned a completely different alignment for Hillcrest Drive for kind of through the bottleneck. And it was brought to us by a couple of property owners that were actually out. And so that one seemed to have the largest amount of impact on everything. And so we kind of screened it out, but we did add it to the study just as a, hey, this was brought up and this is what it would kind of look like, but here's the reasons why we didn't ultimately think that was going to be one of the preferred alternatives. So public sentiment at the meeting number 2, people wanted to keep pedestrians on one side of the road, keep cyclists on the road. They wanted to try to reduce speed on the road, but to like have a minimum burden to landowners. One of the things people thought might happen if you did just a completely separated path is that if that path wasn't lit or plowed, then people were just going to use Hillcrest anyways at night or when it was snowy. And so one of the things that kind of came back is that alternative 5 did have the most positive feedback out of all of them. So not alternative 5 ended up becoming the preferred alternative. Some of it was because of just the safety. You know, by adding that pathway to that side of the road, it eliminates a lot of those crossings, and that eliminated conflict points, which ultimately makes it a little bit safer than some of the other options. The consistency was a good thing that we looked at. And additionally, it received the greatest amount of public support. So that's ultimately what was chosen as the preferred alternative that the county, I think, is going to pursue. One of the things I should talk a little bit about is what this Bridger Street intersection could look like. And so we eliminate the mid-block crossing or the mid-road crossing down there by the park. But we still have to cross the road. And so this option provides a little bit safer crossing point at the street because it's right at an intersection. And so what would end up happening is you'd end up with a 3-way stop at Bridger and then provide a crosswalk kind of on this north leg, and we chose that north leg because there's already an existing sidewalk there. And so that's kind of how we showed people getting onto the pathway. And so just thought I'd mention that image there a little bit. So that's kind of all I had for the presentation. And so if there's questions, be open to try to answer them as best I can. Okay, it's up to Steve.
If I could make one quick comment, Councilmember Hahn questioned what the city's interest in it was to begin with. And I think when we envisioned doing this, one of the issues that we talked to Lance about was when I was on the planning commission, I knew that there were interested parties in and along Hillcrest for the purpose of gaining access to city water. And the county went to Lance and asked him if they wanted to participate specifically because this would provide an avenue for being able to do upgrades to the water supply system in the area there. And then also be able to provide city services to those people on Hillcrest Drive at some time in the future. So the county would be in a situation where we would be securing the easements for the purpose of being able to provide access for infrastructure. So it would be something that, you know, the county has, the city had an interest in it, and we would, you know, if we could combine those two things rather than them happening at disjointed times where we put in a bunch of new pavement and then we go in and dig it all up to start over. That I just wanted to, I neglected to mention that earlier. I want to make sure that was included.
You know, I live on that road. I drive that road 10 times a day. I grew up on that road and it never has any markings on it. I mean, have we ever thought about just putting the white lines down the sides for the pedestrians and then a straight yellow line, because the yellow line that they put down there is crooked, it zigzags in places. And I can tell you that people that are walking or riding their bikes, who's going to enforce them to stay in that lane? Because they don't. They like to walk right down the middle of the lane, so you have to pass around them. I just think, gosh, if we could just try actually painting that road the way it should be painted, maybe that would change people's how they walk and ride it.
Well,
Thank you.
I think, yeah, that certainly is something that would probably benefit the roadway. I would say that painting white lines on a road that's already deficient from a width standpoint, you'd be painting the grass. So you could certainly paint a yellow stripe down the center of the road. There's no place to put the white lines because the road's already too narrow to accommodate what is already a normal traffic road. So that really is most of the problem. Once you get farther downhill, Chris, where it begins to intersect Mortimer Lane, it gets a little bit wider, but in the vast majority of the part, and certainly getting down closer to the city, it's not wide.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah.
Councilman Stoll.
Kyle, thanks for the overview on the alternatives. I'm curious on a couple points and I'll try to prioritize these. So when I look at the portion of the road of Hillcrest that is the cities, and I consider this preferred alternative, I'm guessing you want to have a consistent design across both the county portion and the city portion. But it occurs to me in my non-engineering mind that when we get very close to the city boundary, we do have that alternative pathway off to the right. When I look at the intersection you proposed for Bridger, I just think, I mean, it looks a little awkward to me knowing too that we're getting pedestrians off the road right now on that pathway, and then you're crossing Bridger instead of crossing is that Hillcrest that continues past the intersection, but crossing this direction. So anyway, I guess the question is, are there what are the downsides to having this preferred alternative for the county section, but in the city section, just improving our pathway section and moving, I mean, you're still moving the traffic across the street, I guess. Is that the major downside?
Yeah, I think that's probably the big one, is just that mid-block crossing and
Okay.
trying to get people to stop, mid-road. And this somewhat eliminates some of that, if you had a three-way stop, everybody's stopping, as
Mhm.
opposed to people just maybe ignoring that guy that's standing there,
Mhm.
potentially, or not paying attention and hitting somebody.
Sure. Yeah.
Excuse me for a minute. I'd like to take a short break.
Could we second that? Yes.
So we can see the Q and A. Yeah. I get
And then I think the point of the
Yeah, I'd like to call the meeting back to order. So,
Yes, one thing I should mention too is, this is just kind of a study phase, and so we had to look at quite a few different options of like, what can we do with this space, to make it better for everybody potentially, and that's kind of what the end goal was. What the final version of this looks like is gonna be highly dependent on, can you hear right away? And I think that's a big question, as this progresses through design, things may change, but I think this kind of gives a guiding, direction for the county and potentially the city to move towards.
Mayor, I have two more
Go ahead.
questions, may I? And then
You got two more questions.
I'm always excited. I
Go ahead.
should stop saying that. And then I'm eager to hear Mr. Bauman's comments too. So the question I first have is for within the city property or the city, sorry, not property boundary. It looks to me from the the map server that we do have city property on both sides of Hillcrest or an easement, maybe. Do we anticipate that the city, if we were to mimic this preferred alternative into city boundaries, that we would have adequate city land and easements already, or would we be acquiring or trying to acquire any additional land or right of way?
So that first curve that's just south of this,
Mhm.
intersection.
Yeah.
It's got a pretty tight curve on it, and so there was a little bit of property, that we're recommending to try to get, because of how that curve came through.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right, for the most part. I think the effort, in that area is actually cleaning up the right of way, because it's kind of a complicated issue, but, the way that Hillcrest Drive came about, there was an easement for what was called Ditch Road that kind of came off Bridger Street and then meanders through and doesn't really follow the existing road. And so, that portion that's within the city that, they've acquired some right of way for where the pathway is.
Mhm.
But what happened as those lands developed was people, basically the properties were called out, with the boundaries. But the section there was never actually identified as right of way. And so that piece is kind of a little bit in limbo.
Okay.
So I don't know, if Steve, if you had something to add on that. Other than that.
So inside the city limits, there's a question on who owns the right of way or who owns even the property underneath where the road currently is. Outside the city limits, Ditch Road was a dedicated county road with a 30-foot width. So the county has a 30-foot wide right of way through to where the bottleneck is. And then it kind of goes in and out of there, and people have bought and sold property on either side of it, and it is really a kind of a disaster. But for all intents and purposes, right where Sam Browell's house is, it's 30 feet wide. And that's the most challenging part of this. Beyond that, there's a 40-foot right of way till you get up to the part that goes straight south. And then the county has something 55 to 75 feet. So we've got significantly more right of way in that area. So the engineering exercise here is really how to maneuver the road through the narrowest spot without impacting anybody to the greatest extent that we can.
And this alternative meets that need, Mr. Mayor. if I may.
What we're hoping, the alternative provides the greatest opportunity for providing health, safety, and welfare related issues and providing continuous multimodal ability within the roadway, tying in with what we already have established on Mortimer Lane.
Got it.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you guys, Steve, for coming in and explaining to us what your plans are. Okay, moving on, is discussion concerning resolution 1306 exempting Fremont County Pioneer Museum property.
Mayor? Real quick on both of these, the water systems master plan and the Hillcrest plan,
Right.
they'll be on the regular meeting for adopting them and discussion. So if there's people who want to comment or talk about their public comment, we told them to come
Everywhere.
at the regular session and they could have their 3 minutes at that point in time. But you'll see both of these. These are the pre-discussion before adoption.
Okay. Sounds good. Regine?
If I may, the reason that staff asked adoption of these plans is because that is key to getting us grant funding. So if we want to go for grants and loans and we have a master plan 5 years from now and SRF or SLIB or some grant transportation program doesn't know that the city council adopted this plan, we're not likely to get future funding.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hahn?
Yes, Lance. When we get that information, are we gonna have a breakdown of what's the counties, what's ours, and so we get the whole story. I mean, we get all the information. I mean, I understand you have an alternatives and all that, but really what concerns the city and I mean, that part, so we know the break off between what's ours and what's theirs.
Yeah, we can bring any information that you would like. I think that's why we're talking about it now. So if there is something that you want to talk about more or that we need to postpone this and get you more information, that we do that. So if you'd like a map, we can present where the breakdown is in boundaries. Is that what would be best, or how would you like to
Well,
look at it?
I'm trying to figure out if we're putting a water line from the city out, is it just stopping at the end of Hillcrest or is it going all the way to Mortimer?
No water line currently planned in this at all.
Okay, so what?
This is just roadway.
We're just
and
talking roadway.
Pathway, roadway improvements, as far as where they're at.
Okay,
And there's a planned water line in the master plan to put this in, but there's not a known partner or anybody who's come together to say, hey, let's get together as a special improvement district. Let's work on city water. To me, that would be the group of landowners or a developer coming in right now saying, all right, this would be beneficial, or us, making the decision to incentivize development as a council, saying that we want to build these lines before the road gets paved because it'd be cheaper to build them now. So I mean, a little bit of direction there. And then knowing that at some point that like Mortimer Lane might develop or whatever we're looking at, but that's kind of not really, the way that we've looked at the plan. We've looked at it saying, hey, it's going to be paid for by people who develop or do these special interest groups at that point.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So is there more information we need to get you before next meeting? I mean, we can talk about this more or bring more than the slides if you guys are still questioning anything or have some.
Okay, now I'll move on. Oh, you got something, Adam,
On the next one.
on the next one.
I'm ready.
Okay, on resolution 1306. Adam, go ahead.
I'm gonna make this fast. So at the last meeting, you guys wanted to exempt the open container for the Pioneer Museum. This is a resolution that will do it for the next year. We figured it'd be a little bit better to try it out for a year, make sure everything works out well, there aren't any issues, and then we can change the ordinance in the future. Oh,
Questions?
Yes.
oh,
Councilman Larson?
Sorry. Okay, I'm asking this for Missy. Because, we're going from 8 o'clock till midnight. Is that gonna change the other, open container permits that we got shut off at 10 o'clock?
I mean, the times we can put whatever times we want to. But this is specific to this particular piece of property.
Yeah, I know, but if you do it for that particular piece of property, you should do it for all of them.
Well, the open container permit is an actual permit that each person has to come in and get. This is exempting that from that.
We're still talking about the time. That's what I'm.
Yeah, I mean, you can put whatever time you guys want to. That's why we're presenting it to you guys.
So if we let this and stay at 12 o'clock, then when these other ones come in, they won't.
Potentially.
Okay. That's what I'm trying to say is that, we open up a can of worms there. Yes?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Mayor, yeah.
Go ahead.
Mr. Councilman Larson, I'm glad you brought that up. I put a great deal of thought into that since our vote when we had the first open container permit for the first event a couple months back or a month back, time flies. And because of course, being consistent is highly appealing in so many ways, right? It seems clear and fair. But what I've been thinking about is that the events held here at the Pioneer Museum that we've been seeing permits for me are strikingly different than the other permits that we often have where they're like our street dances and street closures in residential areas where there's more residential intensity or higher traffic, that we're having events, open containers around events that have traffic considerations, residential impacts, that when I think of the weddings largely or fundraisers or there's probably a variety of events held at the Pioneer Museum, they seem on a different order to me in terms of impact that makes me willing to be consistent per the place, not consistent across citywide over a variety of events that have different considerations. That's just where I'm at, but there's a difference that makes a difference in my mind, the types of events at this site versus street dances, street fairs, closures of streets, parties thrown by bars, frankly. That's where I've been sitting with it. I'm excited to hear more, especially from Councilman White, who brought that up too.
I do have a comment.
Councilman Cox?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that too, John. I know that when Councilwoman White brought it up, I think that we were very mindful about the thought that we'd like to keep things consistent. One of the questions to follow up with that consistency purposes is echoing what Councilwoman Stubble said, is the noise ordinance issue with an open container. So the permitting is for an open container, but the real issue isn't that the open container is causing a disturbance in the community. It's the noise that's associated with those types of activities. And I don't know, even on Saturday, there was an activity in the city park. I'm sure you could hear it from your house. And that went well into the evening hours. But those things don't require an open container permit because they're at city park. So there is no time limit there, which is also very interesting. And so I've struggled with this same thing because I remember, Maverick would come and ask for an open container and be like, no, 10 o'clock, you're shutting it down at 10. And so I've battled back and forth with this same issue, but as I reviewed and sort of read some thoughts about the Pioneer Museum, I feel like it is a little bit of a different niche and we need to address that accordingly. I understand the time, if we want to move it to 10 or whatever, we feel more comfortable, but I do think the midnight for that venue is appropriate. There are just a couple of errors in the draft, which is great. I can give those to you later, don't need to do them now. But the only concern of change that I would like to address is ending December 31st, 2024. And the only reason is because that is a New Year's Eve where there may be an event, we may not get to it. So either extending it into January or just a year from today would be my preference.
And we can do that. Mainly this was
Yeah.
a trial run, because if you want to change the ordinance, we don't want to have to do it a number of times. So
Makes sense.
any input you want to put into this, that's totally fine.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Hahn? Mhm.
Mr. Attorney,
Yes, sir.
do we not have disturbance laws in effect in town? So if something gets buck wild, we can take care of that problem?
We don't have a noise ordinance per se, but certainly we have public decency and treating each other well. So that would where law enforcement would come in if things got out of control. Certainly law enforcement could control the situation. The whole reason that the previous councils did a 10 o'clock essential cutoff is the theory was that if they cut the alcohol off, then that would cut the party off. And usually the bands close up by 11 or 12. It gives them time to clean up. And the problem is when you cut off the alcohol at 10, people are going to still be drinking until about 11, and then they're cleaning up and then they're finally out of there. So that was the whole point of the 10 o'clock cutoff. The reason we put midnight is because most of the ordinance, the open containers that have come before the council this year have had 11 or midnight, and that's because they're weddings. And so they go a little bit later.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Lance?
Yes, Mayor and Council, city parks between the hours of 8 AM and 11. Outdoor public recreational facilities are 8 o'clock to 11. And then the community center is 10 AM to 2 AM in the ordinance already.
Thank you.
So it's all over the board, and so I think that the community center being till 2 AM, I think that's because those parties
Says 2 AM.
says 2
So,
AM.
I'm a big fan of consistency, and we can certainly look at this. This might raise some questions about maybe we do need to be more consistent. We can change those ordinances. This will give us a dry run to be able to This will give us this will give us an opportunity to explore exactly if you want to have some consistent times in terms of cutting this off across all ordinances, and we can look at changing that. So this gives you at least an opportunity to look into that.
Sound good?
They have the opportunity to move the party indoors there as well.
Right.
So that's a good thing.
I mean, it seems like probably we're all thinking, and I'll say, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Is that the community center types of events and the type of venue there is probably the most synonymous with this site. So, I mean, 2 AM, I'm in bed by 2 AM. I know, but if that's what we have there, then I would have it apply to this place too. There's probably, well, I'm trying to think, there's equal or not residential impacts to both sides, probably about the same.
Mayor, thank you. I had a meeting today in reference to what our community norms are and specifically around drugs and alcohol. And we heard today from a group of folks that are dealing with kids that get in trouble, we're doubling our citations, we're dealing with more severe high-risk findings kids. And our message frequently in our community is, that open containers are allowed, that we encourage public drinking. And it is a message that does not go unheard by the juveniles and the youth in our community. And so even though we're talking times and we're talking, kind of in jest, and it is kind of one of those things, it is a real issue in our community that you can be at City Park and next to the playground, you can have a whole bunch of adults drinking and becoming intoxicated, and we allow it. I allow it. I sit here and I allow it. I approve it. I agree with it. While I try to fight substance abuse with our youth. And I think that we do need to be a lot more intentional about what our messaging is, and what we allow and what we stand for. You made a great comment, or that you can move that inside. I think it's worth thinking more about and really being intentional with our decisions, not just for consistency purposes, but for what our message is, and what we're trying to relay as our norms in our community and what we stand for. So I do appreciate this conversation, but I do think it's very valuable for opportunity for change.
Councilwoman White.
Thank you, Mayor. A few comments here. So back to the arbitrary and capricious, John. I likewise thought about that, and I tend to agree now more with what Councilwoman Stubble brought up, that the difference is about the place. So when folks are asking to extend their business into what's normally considered public space, like streets, street parties, that type of thing, I think it is appropriate to have a tighter time frame on that than what would happen at Pioneer Museum for that. I would sure hope, I caught that thing too about the December 31st. I would sure hope by then, I'd like to give them a full summer and into the fall to be able to see how things are managed. And I think that gives us opportunity by October or November to have changed this resolution if we want to. So that's less of a concern for me, extending it into January timeframe for this. And then lastly, to what Councilwoman Cox was speaking to, perhaps this is our responsibility in terms of public alcohol consumption, is that maybe it's something like we require any and all events on city or county owned property to have to do ID checks. Maybe it's a simple step. It certainly isn't going to, it's not going to be the magic wand that changes things, but that it is a way to state, we are trying to pay attention to the fact we don't want underage drinking happening on city property. And that's one small thing we can do to continually reiterate and educate the public that that's our stance. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a question on that point. If I
Yes.
could add to Mo.
Go ahead,
Attorney
Councilwoman
Phillips, do you think that's appropriate language, ID checks to add to this resolution, knowing that?
I don't think so. The reason why is because law enforcement can do that at any time they want to.
Okay.
So we don't need to add that in there. It can already do all that stuff.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm thinking the permit, there was some commitment to saying we're gonna do this, and if we're sidestepping the permit with this resolution, we still have another mechanism. then to
But we still have an
make sure.
obligation to do that. Law enforcement does have an obligation to do that.
Great, thank you.
And they check IDs when they have it at the parks and stuff also, so. That's their job, whoever serves it, make sure they're not serving minors.
That's right, unless it's a private individual, to Councilwoman Cox's point, but right, if it's an event with a permit, then they do need to check.
Should check anyway. So. All right,
Oh,
Council, do I dare go to you, Councilman Larson? Oh, we're not done.
nice try.
I'll kind of go back up to staff updates.
Mayor, if I may. I'm
Yes.
sorry, there was chatter, or I'm sorry, chat input on the Zoom from a member of the public that appeared, so could we invite that person to email us their comments since we don't take?
Right.
Lovely, thank you guys.
Thank you. All right, let's do staff updates real quick. And
I'll pass today minor with Raging.
Lance.
Yes, Mayor and Council talked a lot, but real quick, one more that's going to be on your radar is potentially signing some streets for no parking at certain times during the winter to giving us additional right-of-way space to clear snow. We had that discussion with the chief. Last year, we had some people who really didn't want to cooperate at all about moving vehicles, and it put us in a really bad spot on some hills and some tight right-of-ways and getting things out of our way. And if we sign those appropriately, pick one side of the road or the other, or most likely if we're coming down a hill, the stopping side of the road, we think that it could be a safety improvement as well as a way to get some of the vehicles out of the way, park more vehicles out of the right of way and have room to do our operations if we're really going to get the snow that is predicted again this year. So just so you're aware, we're going to be working through those areas, and some people might come to you saying, hey, these got signed. Why did they get signed? And that's the reasoning behind it is safety and trying to remove snow in an efficient way.
Okay, sounds good. Regine.
Thank you. I just want to mention that the open house was successful, so thank to all of you who came. Next time, we're going to make sure the community center is available because the noise in here was crazy. So one of the things that we passed out, if asked at the open house, was this chart in front of you. These are the charts that Shari puts in your financial folder every month. This is not an audited 2023 final chart, but it gives you an idea of percentages of where your money is coming in and where your money is going out. So that's why we presented it to the public. Again, Shari puts these in your folders every month, I think. So it's a good way to know where does your money spent? Well, it's spent 48% on safety, police, fire, those kind of things. So you can just use that. Again, it's not an audited final number, but it gives you a general idea when your public is asking you, where does our money go? The other thing is we keep talking about the museum agreement at the Welcome Center. The city was presented with an agreement. Adam has reviewed it, but we are refining a few of the responsibility line items. So that may be on your next agenda for approval on September 12th is that actual museum agreement for the Welcome Center. And the reason we need that is because we used to have that agreement with the Museum of the American West, and now the county owns it. So we need to get that between the county and the city. The only other thing I have that might show up on the September 12th meeting is, well, it will show up in the September 12th meeting, is there will be a public hearing for the Community Services Block Grant. And that is the grant that we are hoping to use to extend Jefferson Street and pave it into the Poposia River Park. So that's a grant opportunity that's coming up. The grant application is due the 29th of September. So we have to have a public meeting prior to that, and that will be on your September 12th agenda. And that's all I have, unless you have questions.
Questions?
Mayor, may I?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. And Regine, this might be for Shari too. I really love having this handy. Sorry. But I do wonder if the next time you print it, can we break out the intergovernment revenues and 85% of our revenues? I feel like that clouds some of the detail that matters about taxes collected here that are returned are different from the state distribution, right? The discretionary distribution or royalties that are shared or severance tax that's shared. So I'd love to see a little more detail. You know, maybe it still shows that it's derived back from the state, but what's inside that 85% does matter, I think. Thank you. Thanks, sir.
That's it.
Anybody else?
Sorry. Adam's got a mouthful.
Motion to adjourn. Oh, I mean, I've got
Yeah.
nothing else.
Rachel.
I just wanted to remind everyone about the public officer training tomorrow. It will be here if you intend to join us at 9 a.m. I'll have a sign-in sheet. I believe Councilmember Stubble is going to do your own thing. Or not. Join us if you want. Okay. Additionally, I just wanted to let you know that in the next voting session or so, there may be some revisions of the mechanic job description. We are looking to update that because a current mechanic has submitted his intent to retire. So we will start looking at updating that job description and hiring for it.
Any questions?
We go backwards to me again, sorry.
Yes, we'll go back to that.
Just wanted to provide an update that we did submit 2 grants earlier this week. These were initially approved after like a concept paper approval. And these are through the Department of Energy, the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, their Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Programs. I know that's a really long title, but that's what it's called. So there are 2 applications. One is from the city of Lander in the amount of 500,000, which would potentially help us switch over our street lights from their current out-of-date lighting methods to an LED system. So that's one of them. The main theme, we can share more details with you if you're interested. The other one is a collaboration grant, and that is in the amount of $100,000, and that's planning around the topic of energy efficiency. It's called an energy planning grant. It's through the Mountain West Collaboration of Tourism Communities. So the city of Moab is the sponsor on that particular grant application, and we're just one of their communities that they selected to work with. So no final decisions. We'll probably know more October, November, December. And then at that time, we'll bring it forward if it's awarded to see if the city wants to accept it. So we can provide copies of those applications if anyone is interested. Oh yeah, sorry. I forgot the most important part. These required 0 cost share, so there's no match needed or expenses from the city budget at this time.
Okay, that sounds good. We like those. No cost share things. So just real quick, before I get ahead of myself. Mayor and council updates. I knew it was going to be long, so I thought I would just see. I'll start with Councilman Larson.
Nothing tonight. Thank you.
Councilman Hahn. Oh, Councilwoman White.
Only a couple of things. Their senior center only meets monthly, so no meeting from them. And we did not have a planning commission board of adjustment meeting last Thursday. And I wanted to clarify the great headline. I'm glad that this was covered in response to the open house that happened. The headline had the big number of flood mitigation as 12 million. Didn't specify until the very, very end that the city's cost is 35% of that, or just over 4.2 million. I think that's important to note that distinction there. And again, reiterating that we spent almost 2 million addressing issues that came up from the 2017 flood. And then I wanted to send really heartfelt gratitude and kudos to some volunteer groups that had Lander absolutely hopping this past several days. From the Lander Presents crew, is an amazing program on Thursday night, and then Lander Cycling Club and Lander Art Center teaming up for Jurassic Classic, brought folks to town. Seemed to work well for the 2 entities to combine. I thought that was a really clever response to how to continue to be relevant and be efficient, and also provided a lot of engagement for local folks as well as drawing folks into town through tourism. So my thanks go out to those groups for, I know that was a lot of hard work to put all of those things together. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Hahn.
Yes, I wanted to bring up, we lost a great councilman, Kenny Stroh. He passed away and he was really a great guy, did a lot of good work up here with everybody. So anyway, Kenny, I hope you found a good place.
Councilman Cox. Councilman Stubble.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any updates from the boards I'm a liaison to, but if I may take the privilege of speaking for council and staff and probably many here, I did want to send our condolences to Councilwoman Cox on the loss of your mother-in-law. I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Mrs. Harms, but from what I've read and heard, it sounds like she was incredibly dedicated to the community and to her family. And so I think I hope you take some comfort in the love that she shared with community and family means she'll live on the hearts of many. And it's a difficult time for you, and we hope you have the time and space to heal and grieve.
Councilman Hahn.
Nothing, Mayor.
Okay, just real quick, same, Kenny Stroh was a good gentleman to talk to, and he'd come in and visit with me quite a bit, so he will be missed. And if you're not knowing Connie, she's a great loss to our community. So like I said, our condolences go out to the whole family. So just to tag on that, and like I said, life is short, so.
Mayor,
Now, yes, ma'am.
there is a all employee barbecue tomorrow, 11:30 to 1 and the drill field. So if you guys are all available, please come join the staff for that.
Yep. So if there's nothing else. Can I get a motion to adjourn? John?
Second.
Okay, let's go home. Thank you, guys. Well, just updates. You're gonna, and then